This may sound crazy, but can I replace my $10,000 professional Mac setup with a streamlined, all-in-one 24-inch M3 iMac? And what is the experience like moving over from Apple's most powerful M3 Max and M1 Ultra chips over to their consumer-grade M3 chips running on 8 gigabytes of memory? And we're gonna answer important questions on what it's like to work with Apple's baseline machines compared to Apple's most powerful machines to see, is it really worth upgrading? And also, we're gonna answer important questions like, is this Mac Studio even plugged in? It's not. Problem solved. Well, let's start by actually removing all this stuff. So goodbye MacBook Pro, $7,000 of crap. I'm not actually throwing that, that's way too expensive. So long, Mac Studio. You served your duty well. I might edit that so it looked like I threw it. I'll never get tired of that sound. Now, one of the first things I like to do when I'm setting up a new Mac is to make sure that it is protected. And the best way to do that is to download Trend Micro's Premium Security Suite, because it has everything you need to not only keep your Mac secure, but also your mobile device, and perhaps even more importantly, your entire internet presence. Of course, good security all starts with a really good antivirus, and that's what Trend Micro has here, and it can scan your entire computer in one click. Trend Micro's fast antivirus system scans quickly through your computer to see if there are viruses already on the system, and it can also scan for real-time threats when you're browsing the web, which helps me stay one step ahead of cyber criminals. And good news, my computer is safe, but let's be honest, we're not constantly working at our desks all day, and we're not just using one device. But thankfully, Trend Micro also has our mobile devices covered as well. Trend Micro's mobile security can help you tackle security threats on the go easily, and also recommends good security practices with a one-tap security scan. My favorite feature is the Wi-Fi checker, so it can check if your current Wi-Fi connection is secure, and this is great for me because I am constantly hopping on public Wi-Fi networks whenever I go out to a cafe or whenever I need to visit an airport, and it has built-in safe surfing that instantly blocks unsafe websites, trackers, and allows you to instantly turn off annoying ads with just a tap. Trend Micro's ID security goes beyond protecting your devices too, because it can protect accounts like your email, your banking, your credit cards, your social security number, to see if they've been compromised in a dark web leak. So whether it's on your computer or your phone or literally the entire web, Trend Micro's Premium Security Suite has you covered. To learn more and to protect yourself, make sure you click the link in the description. And thank you to Trend Micro for keeping my devices and my data safe, and also for sponsoring this video. The first thing that jumps out to me with this new setup is I love an all-in-one design. I was a loyal iMac user for years and years and years when I was initially growing the Greg's Gadgets YouTube channel, used an Intel iMac all through that time, all up until the M1 generation of Macs came out, and then I briefly switched over to an M1 MacBook Pro, just the regular M1 model, because they didn't have the Pro or the Max chips out at the time. And then I had another brief love affair with a 24-inch M1 iMac that I really enjoyed using for a long time, spec'd that out with 16 gigabytes of memory, and I used that until the more powerful versions of the MacBook Pro came out with the M1 Pro and M1 Max chip, and then of course the Mac Studio came out. And basically, we've been sitting here in the Apple Silicon world with just this option for the 24-inch iMac for a while, just with M1 chips, and now it's finally updated to M3, so that does make it more powerful, but it's still not as capable as a lot of the other professional grade Macs in Apple's lineup right now. You can get some really powerful computers with that M3 Max MacBook Pro or something like an M2 Ultra Mac Studio. And I would have loved to see something like the M3 Pro chip come to the iMac, even in the 24-inch design. I think that would be a really compelling computer. But yeah, the thing that I really like about the iMac is this all-in-one design. I mean, this is a gorgeous computer to me. It's one of the best looking computers that Apple makes. The design is so thin. It really is impressive that they're able to fit in a 24-inch display in here, the entire guts of the computer in here as well, and it is super thin. It's like about as thin as my finger going all the way up the side. And then of course, you have to love the attention to detail on the colors here. This is the orange color for the iMac, and you know, Steve Jobs used to turn these around and go, the back of our computers looks better than the front of the other guys. Well, I think that's still true, and I actually think the back of this iMac looks better than the front of this iMac, right? It looks really, really cool. The bright orange color on the back. I think this is Apple's design at its best, and I would love to see them do more colorful products from time to time in their other product lineups. Take a page out of what you did with this iMac, because it is such an impressive piece of design. Still, you have limiting factors here with the design, right? Apple basically took away all of our ports on the iMac, which is kind of the opposite of what they've been doing with like the MacBook Pro lineup, right? They've been giving us more ports. They just introduced the entry-level M3 MacBook Pro, and now that has more ports. But here is one of their desktop computers, and it's pretty bare bones. If you get the base model of this, it actually only comes with just 2 USB-C ports. At least this one has 4 USB-C ports, but only 2 of them are Thunderbolt USB-C. I think the ingenious thing though that Apple did with this iMac, which I thought they would bring over to the MacBook Pro power bricks, but they didn't, is they put an Ethernet port in it. So this is a very clean setup because this is actually connected with Ethernet right now, but it's not actually hooked up here to the back because right on the floor is the power brick, and that is connected with the Ethernet cable. So again, I thought that was ingenious design on Apple's part. You can make a really clean setup here, just have the one cable coming up from the back. And I thought, yeah, when Apple refreshes MacBook Pros, they have a power brick. They could put the Ethernet port in there too, and they didn't do that, right? This is like the only Mac that kind of has this solution, and it's a good one. The adjustability on the stand is okay, right? That's one of the problems I really had with these new 24-inch iMacs. You can see the height is not that high. This is actually on a stand from GroveMade, and this basically lifts this up to me for a usable height where I'm not kind of, you know, if I put this down on the ground over here, we could do that because it's so light. That's another good quality about it only weighs 11 pounds. I don't know if that's like a big thing for people to have a lightweight desktop computer, but this is the lightest one by far, right? In terms of one that's an all-in-one. If I sit up straight like I'm supposed to with proper posture, this is not a good experience. So I would like to see them add a height adjustable stand. I guess maybe that's not something the iMac's gonna have. They do have that option on the studio display, but yeah, it's a lot of money. So maybe they don't wanna put that on the iMac, but yeah, I recommend something like a riser if you're going to be getting an iMac like this, because that kind of solves that issue. But other than that, the tilt and height are, you know, very familiar for me as someone that's used an iMac for a long time. It's basically the same adjustments you could get on previous iMacs. Now, one of my areas for concern switching over back to the iMac was the display. In 2 areas, right? I was worried about the display quality compared to my studio display. I've been using that for a while now, so I kind of forgot what does the iMac display look like, and also the size, because this is smaller. It's a 24-inch display. Now, in terms of quality, I gotta say, just looking at the desktop, it looks pretty much identical to what was on my studio display. I really can't notice the difference looking at the wallpaper or the icons on the bottom. The text for the time and everything looked pretty sharp. Let's go ahead and go into Safari. Let's load up The Verge and see. Yeah, so you can see text on here looks super sharp. And I mean, that's no surprise. It is a 4.5K Retina display at 24 inches. So even though the studio display is a 5K display, because it's at a bigger 27 inches, these displays basically have about the same pixel density. So in terms of resolution, they are both super sharp. Size of this display is actually quite fine. Maybe I'm just sitting really close to it, but yeah, I put this up here and you know, looking at Safari, I watched a video in it. You know, we should probably load up Final Cut Pro. That's an area where I have a lot of tools open, and I can kind of see maybe if this display is going to give me any issues. So this is just a sample project I had loaded up in Final Cut Pro. Oh boy, look at that face. But yeah, tools and everything, you know, it's a little bit smaller than the 27-inch display, but as someone who's worked on a 24-inch iMac before, I know I could make this work. Ideally, I would want a bigger display, because I want as big of a display as possible with the right specs, right? But yeah, this one could certainly work for me. Another thing I like about my studio display though is the inbuilt speakers. So how does this 24-inch iMac actually stack up to it? Oh, wow.
Hold me close till I get up. Time is barely on our side. I don't wanna waste what's left.
I feel like these sound better than the studio display. Yeah, I don't know, these either sound really close to the studio display or maybe even better somehow. I actually don't know the technical specs of what is in the studio display in terms of speakers versus the iMac, or whether it's the position of where the iMac is and how it's firing out right now, but this sounds really good. So I'm actually pleasantly surprised. I thought I was gonna be in for a noticeable downgrade here, but not really. What about the camera though? Because one of the things about the studio display is it does have the center stage feature, but it does kind of compromise on camera quality. I haven't used the iMac camera in a little bit, so let's see how this looks. Oh, it is a mess back there. I don't even think I should show that, but yeah, wow. It actually looks pretty decent. So I think it's a 1080p webcam on the iMac. You don't get the center stage stuff. You can see giant mess in the background, but in terms of just, yeah, it looks pretty good. Yeah, I'm pleasantly surprised with this. I always forget just how good the iMac webcam looks. So yeah, you got some things that are superior about the experience on this 24-inch iMac. Of course, that's just part of the iMac, right? What we're really talking about here when we're talking about can this replace a desktop setup is really the M3 chipset, especially the limited one in here with just the 8 GB of memory. So let's see, let's open up a couple apps and see if we face any limitations. We're gonna open Safari, open up a couple tabs here. I'm constantly checking through email, so let's go ahead and open up the email client as well. Get that open. That's usually in my workspace. I usually like to listen to something too. Why don't we open up the podcast app? We'll just play this podcast on mute in the background just so it's taking up some of the RAM on the system. And I got Bare Notes open as well. And this is pretty much what my workspace looks like throughout the day when I'm not editing video. So this is like a basic idea of what I would consider like basic tasks that everyone does, right? They web browse, they're writing stuff down, they're listening to something, and they're checking email. Everyone's checking email, right? So, you know, let's go ahead and research. We're doing a video about the 24-inch iMac. We'll load up the web page, scroll through this. You can see just how beautiful it is on Apple's website. I'll go in and write something down about the iMac that I like. Beautiful design. We'll go and check our podcast player. We'll skip around. Yeah, you could do that. Check our emails real quick. Let's load up the activity monitor. Let's see how much memory we're using, right? So we just went through all those apps and you can kind of see already, we are using basically our whole allotment of memory here. We just have 8 GB of memory and we're already using 7 GB of it, but you can also see we've already used swap and cache files just with this basic setup. That's one of the problems with this limited memory setup is you don't got that much to work with. But what did you notice? Did anything lag? Did anything go wrong? Did anything crash? Was something unresponsive? No. If you're doing something that looks like this with basic tasks, even though you can see this memory pressure going up and down, the system architecture is fast enough that you're never really going to notice any slowdowns doing these basic tasks. The M3 is just too capable to really be slowed down by basic tasks like this. But I got other stuff to do that is more intensive. So I actually have to go and edit a video for TikTok about the new collaborative playlists in iOS 17.3. So let's go ahead and see how that goes with all this other stuff open. So we're still gonna keep everything open in the background. I'm just gonna full screen this. So to do my TikToks, I usually record them on 2 phones. So I gotta airdrop these files over to the Mac real quick. That is the power of the Apple ecosystem right there. And as I'm finishing up the edit for this little short TikTok we're doing, I really had no performance issues at all. This felt just like working on a much more expensive Mac. And you can see even with the memory here, we're still using about 6 GB of memory, and the memory pressure, you know, is like in the middle range, but I really didn't feel any of that with system performance. But again, this is kind of like an example of maybe what most people might be doing, right? A lot of people are into short form content. We made a minute video here. Obviously, that's probably not gonna peg the system. I found that with Apple Silicon Macs, you're usually kind of limited the longer the project is. So if I go in and work on one of my other projects that's more than 10 minutes in length, then I'm probably gonna start facing some of these memory issues. But again, we're trying to gauge what it's like to use a Mac from a normal user's perspective too, right? And if you're just making some short form content, you got some apps open in the background like Safari, Mail, Notes, Podcasts, right? You can absolutely do that this system will handle that just fine. There's no worry there. But we should probably load into a more complex Final Cut project to see if it can actually handle my full workload. I don't have any video files stored on here for a large project, but I do have them on this external Thunderbolt SSD drive. The drive on this is actually almost as fast as the internal drive on this iMac. And one thing I want to just mention is that, you know, we talk about like the iMac being a consumer grade device, but I feel like one thing that a lot of reviewers kind of like fail to mention is how powerful the IO is on this device. Like a lot of like PC computers still don't have things like Thunderbolt, and the fact that this has like 2 Thunderbolt ports, even though it's like kind of like consumer grade, makes it really capable. 40 gigabits per second, we could hook it up to this external SSD drive over here. We can hook it up to like a really powerful Thunderbolt dock if we had to. But yeah, you have really powerful connections with that Thunderbolt port. The only bad part is you have to rotate it to get to the back to actually plug this thing in. I should have done it the other way, but I kind of wanted to demonstrate to you. Ooh, I think I just scraped the wall. There we go. So I'm messing around in a longer Final Cut project to see how the performance is on this. This is an older project, but it's about 18 minutes in length, so I want to see as we start to edit it if we run into any issues over here. So you can see as I'm expanding clips, as I'm adding more things to this timeline, you can see we got the warning right there. Video frames are dropped during playback. This is something I really never experience on my M3 Max MacBook Pro, or something I didn't experience on my M1 Ultra Mac Studio. And if we pull up the activity monitor again, we can see that we are using a fair bit of memory. You know what? There's actually a pretty decent amount of 4K clips on this timeline, and it's handling it pretty well. This is actually handling it better than my M1 iMac with 8 gigabytes of memory, if I'm remembering correctly. So I think Apple's new dynamic caching feature for the memory allocation with these M3 chips actually seems to be working. It's helping these limited memory Macs out quite a bit. But I don't think we really need to dive into this any further. There's obviously some choppiness in the timeline as I'm adding these multiple streams of 4K, and as I start to add effects, as I start to color grade, as this thing starts to render out. You can actually see it's rendering out right now. This is gonna render out slower than something like an M3 Max or an M1 Ultra chip because it doesn't have as many powerful GPU cores. But I think what I wanted to illustrate here is that this is still a pretty capable machine. If you ask me, Greg, could you edit a project on an 8 gigabyte iMac? The answer to that would probably be yes. Would it be the smoothest? Would it be the best tool for the job? No, but could I technically do it? Especially something that's not super complex? Yeah, I think I'd have no problem editing a 4K 15-minute video on the M3 iMac, even with the limited amount of 8 gigabytes of memory. All right, so what have I learned here? Well, I actually went into this thinking I would kind of get a more drastic result going into this. For most tasks, replacing my, really expensive setup, they perform about the same as they do on this pretty inexpensive iMac for an all-in-one setup. And when you look at the charts and stuff like that, it doesn't really tell the whole story. You know, when you're dealing with Safari web browsing or emails or, calendar, basic tasks that you would do, these things are gonna feel very similar on a base level M3 machine as they do with a $7,000, max spec M3 Max MacBook Pro. Where you will start to notice the differences are when you're dealing with Pro applications. So in Final Cut Pro, we had that example, right, where we're playing with the timeline. We saw the timeline start to stutter, start to slow down, and we saw the frame drop warning. Well, that is something I have yet to see on my M3 Max MacBook Pro. We also noticed that the render times were pretty long. Again, something on my M3 Max seems to speed by when those progress bars start to go by. But again, we kind of went into this saying, what would happen if I took that really expensive setup with a really expensive display, with the really expensive computer attached to it, and replace it with something in the $1,300 to $1,500 range, and all-in-one. And I gotta say, with modern Apple Silicon, it's almost the same experience, which is really good because obviously this is not targeting professional users. But as a normal user, if you buy something like this Mac, you're getting a machine that is very capable, and you can do a lot with this machine, even though when you look at it, it doesn't look like something that would scream powerhouse. But in a way, it kind of is. So this is a really good computer still. It may not be as fast as the bleeding edge of Macs, but still extremely capable. I kind of walked away with this remembering just how revolutionary the initial M1 chips are, And the M3 has just gotten even more powerful after that. So this thing is still a really good computer. I may have misjudged it initially. And when you really look at this thing from a value proposition of a really good screen, a nice set of speakers, a good webcam, and a really clean all-in-one design, with the performance to boot in some cases, I think you're looking at a really good Mac if you're getting one. The only question is, does the iMac fit into your lifestyle? Is it technically the best machine that you should buy for your use case? And I think that answer is starting to shrink for a lot of people because there's a lot of Apple Silicon Macs in the market. You could get by with something cheaper like a Mac Mini if you don't care about an all-in-one design, which will have very similar performance. When they release the M3 Mac Mini, it'll be the same performance. Or you can get something really portable and just as powerful as an M3 MacBook Pro, which even has more ports than this iMac, which is an all-in-one desktop. But I think if you're looking for a desktop that is an all-in-one, this is still a really good buy. So yeah, I still recommend the M3 iMac surprisingly, and I really like it, especially the colors. Apple, you should make more of those. So hopefully you found this video helpful. If you did, it's a little bit of a different video, I know, but if you did, please give me a like. If you want to see more from the channel, make sure you're subscribed. And as always, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you all in the next video. Maybe not with this setup though. I'm gonna switch back.